Xi artifact underscore ID equals 6 C 6 5 A 4 artifact underscore version underscore ID equals 89198575544 C782 33 C9D 6 FD 66. Title equals The Fire of Defiance TXT. Content type equals text/markdown. She torched my workshop because I wouldn't bend to her rules. I'm not exaggerating. There's a smoldering crater where my backyard studio used to stand, reduced to ash and rubble. And yet, somehow, I'm the one being called the troublemaker. It all started with a smug clipboard and a rule she demanded I sign to protect the community. And it ended with me crouched in my car at 2 a.m., watching shadowy figures skulk near my property line. At first, I thought it was just petty neighborhood drama. But after the threats, the fines, the cryptic notes shoved under my door, and everything I uncovered, I'm not even sure she was working alone. Would you have signed her ridiculous agreement, or would you have stood your ground like I did? My name's Ethan Carter. I'm 32, and for 4 years, I thought I'd carved out a quiet life in a sleepy suburb of Willow Creek, Oregon. It's the kind of place where people wave from their porches and kids ride bikes until dusk. In 2021, I bought a modest house with a detached backyard studio, a charming little relic from the 1930s, and turned its lower level into a woodworking shop. I'd spent years slaving away in corporate furniture design, so running a small custom furniture business felt like freedom. My workshop wasn't just a business, it was a haven. I'd pour my heart into handcrafted tables and chairs, sanding walnut until it gleamed, while neighbors like Mrs. Clara Hensley, a retired librarian, would drop by with her knitting and chat for hours. Jake, the local mechanic, would swing in every morning for a quick coffee and to grumble about the Blazers' latest loss. The studio felt like the neighborhood's living room, not some sterile storefront. Looking back, I was naive to think a place that brought people together wouldn't attract the wrong kind of attention. That attention came in the form of Margaret Voss, the 55-year-old president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Margaret wasn't just in charge, she acted like she owned the neighborhood. Always draped in tailored blazers, her auburn hair swept into a flawless bun, she had a smile that could curdle milk. It was all teeth, no warmth, like she was sizing you up for a violation notice. For 4 years, I'd stayed off her radar. My workshop was low-key, no loud machinery, no parking chaos, no complaints from neighbors. I thought I was being a good citizen, offering custom pieces without forcing folks to drive 30 minutes to a big box store. But Margaret had other ideas about what belonged in her perfect community. It was a crisp October morning in 2024 when everything changed. I was planing a piece of oak when I heard the sharp clack-clack of heels on my gravel path. Through the window, I saw Margaret striding toward my studio, clutching a sleek leather binder and wearing an expression that screamed trouble. My gut twisted. She didn't knock, just barged in like she owned the place, which, in her twisted HOA logic, she probably believed she did. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice dripping with that fake authority people use when they're about to ruin your day. "We need to talk about this little operation of yours." She called my workshop a visual blight and claimed it was disrupting the neighborhood's refined character. I stood there, planer in hand, unsure whether to laugh or tell her to get out. Instead, I just stared as she opened her binder with a dramatic flourish and slapped a stack of papers on my workbench, hard enough to scatter wood shavings. "The HOA board has passed a new covenant," she announced. "No home businesses. It's designed to preserve our community's exclusivity and elevate property standards." I skimmed the document, and my jaw tightened. This wasn't some vague rule, it was a surgical strike. The language specifically targeted woodworking operations in residential outbuildings and commercial activities generating foot traffic in quiet zones. I looked up, trying to keep my voice even. "This is awfully specific, Margaret. Did the board really spend this much time writing rules about backyard workshops?" Her smile turned colder. "The board recognizes that certain activities undermine the residential elegance that makes Willow Creek desirable." She paused, glancing around my studio like it was a landfill. "This old shed might have some quaint charm, but progress outweighs nostalgia." That should have been my first red flag, but I was too focused on the fine print. Buried in the legalese was a clause exempting existing landscaping and construction businesses operated by board members or their immediate families. So, Margaret's husband's fencing company, which parked industrial trucks on their cul-de-sac daily, was fine. But my workshop, serving maybe 20 customers a week, was somehow a neighborhood crisis. "I'll need time to review this," I said, barely holding back my anger. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping just enough to show irritation. "This isn't a discussion, Mr. Carter. I've run this HOA for 6 years, and no one's ever defied a board decision." She handed me a pen. "You have 48 hours to sign and shut down." That moment, her absolute certainty I'd cave, lit a fire in me. "Mrs. Voss," I said, matching her icy tone, "I'm going to need more than 48 hours to consult a lawyer." Some of these rules seem legally shaky. Her face twisted, something almost wild flashed in her eyes. "People who don't understand community standards," she said softly, gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements, "tend to face consequences." She turned to leave, then paused at the door with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "The Millers learned to comply last year when their little candle business violated our rules. You might want to ask them how that went." The Millers. I hadn't thought about them in months, but her words hit like a punch. They'd run a small candle-making side hustle from their garage until they suddenly moved away after a string of HOA violations. I looked at Margaret and said, "I'm not signing. If you want to shut me down, you'll need more than a rule tailored to target me." Her mask slipped just enough for me to see the fury beneath. "You have no idea what you're up against," she hissed. "This community has standards, and I enforce them. People who don't cooperate learn why it's in their best interest to do so." As her heels faded into the distance, I knew I'd just made an enemy. That night, an anonymous note appeared in my mailbox: "Comply or be removed." Margaret wasn't wasting time. By the next morning, a city inspector was at my door, citing multiple anonymous complaints about building code violations. In 4 years, I'd never had a single issue. Now, suddenly, there were multiple reports about my workshop's safety. The inspector spent 3 hours checking wiring, ventilation, even the distance between my workbench and the fire extinguisher. As he left, he shook his head. "This is one of the tightest setups I've seen. Whoever called this and either has insane standards or a personal vendetta." I didn't tell him I knew exactly which it was. Margaret's campaign escalated fast. 2 days later, I got an HOA violation notice for improper waste disposal, a $250 fine with photos of my trash cans, angled to make them look like a dump, timestamped at 6:15 a.m. on pickup day, 20 minutes before the truck came. That kind of timing wasn't accidental. She was watching me. Meanwhile, her husband's fencing trucks blocked the street for days without a peep from the HOA. The hypocrisy was infuriating. I started noticing patterns. Neighbors with pristine yards got fines for minor infractions like mailbox color, while Margaret's allies skated free. Selective enforcement was her weapon, and she wielded it like a pro. I wasn't about to roll over. I installed security cameras, documented every interaction, and dug into Margaret's tenure as HOA president. What I found was chilling. For years, she'd systematically driven out small businesses and defiant residents with targeted rules and harassment. The Millers weren't an outlier, they were part of a pattern. Families moved away after endless HOA battles. Small businesses folded under violations. Margaret was turning Willow Creek into her personal fiefdom, and HOA records hard to access but not impossible showed questionable spending. Thousands funneled to her husband's company, vague consulting fees, and equipment purchases that never materialized. She was treating dues like her personal piggy bank. Armed with this, I decided to confront her at the next HOA meeting. These gatherings were usually sleepy affairs, with Margaret dictating new rules to a handful of board residents. But I came prepared with a folder of evidence. The community center, redecorated with HOA funds to look like a corporate boardroom, was packed with about 20 neighbors, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret stood at the front, exuding control in another crisp blazer. "Before we begin," she said, her eyes locking on me, "I'd like to address inappropriate commercial activities. Certain operations," she paused for effect, "are degrading our community's character and property values." I waited until she finished, then stood, clutching my folder. "Mrs. Voss, could you define inappropriate? Are you talking about retired librarians or mechanics who buy local furniture? Which ordinance labels them undesirable? And how does that square with fair housing laws?" The room froze. Margaret's confident smirk faltered, just for a second. "It's obvious to anyone who values standards," she snapped, but her voice wavered. I held up photos of her husband's trucks parked illegally for weeks. "Speaking of standards, are construction vehicles blocking fire lanes exempt? Or do rules only apply to certain people?" A few neighbors nodded. Clara Hensley leaned forward, intrigued. For 25 minutes, I laid out Margaret's pattern: harassment, selective enforcement, shady finances. The room shifted. People who'd stayed quiet for years started whispering. Jake chuckled when I showed Margaret's trash photos versus her husband's unpunished violations. By the end, Margaret's authority was crumbling. Neighbors asked about missing funds and uneven fines, and her answers grew defensive, almost frantic. When someone demanded a breakdown of community improvement spending, she stammered first. The meeting ended with her promising to review concerns and giving me a 10-day extension to consider her rule. I knew it was a stall tactic to crush me quietly. That week, neighbors shared their own Margaret stories. I wasn't Alanesh targeted anyone who dared defy her. But she wasn't slowing down. She pushed a zoning change to ban all backyard businesses, starting with mine. It wasn't just her Anna Maria, it was the system she'd built. I spent those 10 days preparing like my life depended on it, because it felt like it did. I dug deeper into the studio's history and found gold. It was designed by Henry Lyle Morgan, a lesser-known but respected architect from the Prairie School. His work could qualify for historical protection with serious legal weight. I filed for designation, not just to save my shop, but because Margaret's dismissal of the building as expendable made me suspect she'd go beyond fines. It was the smartest move I made. Margaret's behavior turned unhinged. She spray-painted my shop sign, reported it as illegal, scattered nails in my driveway, and filed 14 police complaints in 10 days, everything from suspicious loitering to chemical odors. All were dismissed, but the intent was clear. She wanted me gone, maybe even arrested. On day 8, she stormed into my shop during a busy morning, with Clara, Jake, and a dozen others present. "This ends now," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "You have 24 hours to shut this down, or you'll face consequences you can't imagine." Her tone vicious, unhinged, made Clara gasp. I stayed calm. "Mrs. Voss, you're disturbing my customers and threatening me. Please leave." She turned red. "Your customers don't belong here. This is illegal, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." Jake piped up. "What's illegal about neighbors buying a table, Margaret?" She whirled on him, practically snarling. "Don't question me. I've protected this community's value for 6 years, and I won't let some nobody ruin it." She ranted about fire codes, undesirable people, and neighborhood decay, then stormed out, pausing to hiss. "This place is a fire risk, and the city will handle it for public safety." The words fire risk and public safety, paired with the faint gasoline smell I'd noticed around my studio, sent a chill down my spine. That night, I posted flyers exposing Margaret's campaign and asking for neighbors' stories. By morning, they were torn down, and my trash cans were spray-painted. "This ends now." I added photos to my evidence pile and decided to stake out my property. I'd upgraded my cameras with thermal imaging, paranoid about Margaret's escalation. At 2:17 a.m. on November 3, 2024, my phone pinged a thermal alert. From my car, parked discreetly down the street, I saw 2 figures near my studio. One was Margaret, her silhouette unmistakable. The other was a man in his 40s, carrying a large canister. I started recording, my fixed cameras capturing every angle. Margaret gestured wildly, pointing at the building's foundation and roof. She handed him a thick envelope, cash, clearly. He counted it, nodded, and she slipped back to her car, parked a block away. I'd been watching her for hours. The man worked methodically, dousing my studio with accelerant foundation, walls, roof. He wasn't rushed. This was a pro. I called 911, heart pounding, describing a crime in progress. The dispatcher kept me on the line as I watched him finish. At 2:45 a.m., he lit the match. Flames roared, swallowing my studio in minutes. I sat in my car, sick but resolute, recording as my dream burned. Margaret stayed parked, snapping photos of the blaze with her phone, gloating over her victory. The arrogance was staggering. She was documenting her own crime. Firefighters arrived 15 minutes later, too late to save the studio but in time to stop the spread. Police followed, and I handed over my footage. Margaret paying the arsonist, her instructions clear on my directional mics. Burn it completely, especially the workshop. The detective's jaw dropped as he watched her photograph the fire. "This is airtight," he said. "She'll be in cuffs by morning." The arsonist was arrested at his motel by 6 a.m., confessing instantly and producing the $3,500 Margaret paid him, her fingerprints on the bills. Margaret was arrested at her house, still in pajamas, stunned that her actions had consequences. She kept ranting about being HOA president and protecting the community. The historical designation, approved 2 days before the fire, turned her crime into a federal case. Destroying a Morgan-designed structure wasn't just arson, it was a cultural heritage violation. Charges piled up: conspiracy to commit arson, property destruction, insurance fraud. She'd assumed I'd take insurance money and leave, and federal heritage violation. Each carried years in prison. Her lawyer pushed for a plea, but the prosecutor wouldn't budge, not with video, audio, fingerprints, and a paper trail. The trial, starting February 2025, became a media circus. Willow Creek's HOA nightmare was national news, a cautionary tale of power run amok. My lawyer, Rachel Nguyen, a property law expert, was ready. "Margaret handed us a slam dunk," she said. "I've seen corrupt HOAs, but never one dumb enough to burn a building on camera." Margaret's defense claimed I'd faked the footage and provoked her, painting me as a schemer. Rachel countered with months of documented harassment, financial records showing Margaret's $3,500 withdrawal, and testimony from the Millers about their own ordeal. The historical designation was the knockout blow. Rachel showed Margaret had called the preservation office 4 times, checking on my application. She knew the studio's status and burned it anyway. In court, Margaret's own voice recorded saying, "Burn it completely, focus on the workshop," broke her. She sobbed, claiming HOA stress and protecting property values justified her actions. The jury wasn't buying it. After 3 hours, they convicted her on all counts. At sentencing, the judge ordered $600,000 for the studio's historical value, $700,000 in punitive damages, and $150,000 for my losses and trauma, $1.45 million total, plus 4 years in federal prison. Margaret's face went ashen. Her husband walked out when the numbers dropped. Days later, a leaked clip of her smirking by my fence before the fire went viral. Margaret's house sold to cover part of the damages, a poetic twist as her base of power funded my recovery. The HOA board, now led by Clara, repealed her rules and uncovered $95,000 in embezzled funds, triggering more charges. Her allies abandoned her. Her husband's business was cited and forced to relocate. Using the settlement, I built a community hub where my studio stood, with a new workshop, meeting space, and HOA Abuse Resource Center, honoring Morgan's design. Neighbors rallied. Jake started a coffee club, Clara a garden, the Millers donated decor. Margaret's appeals dragged on, all denied. She served her full sentence, released in early 2029 to a cramped apartment, working a call center job, wages garnished for 20 years. When she visited the community hub, she looked defeated but unrepentant. "You ruined my life," she spat, blaming me for her fall. I pointed to the hub neighbors laughing, creating, unafraid. "This is what you try to stop, Margaret. Does this look ruined?" She stormed out, muttering about standards, oblivious to her role in her downfall. Weeks later, an anonymous note arrived. "You should have signed." I pinned it to the hub's board, next to a yoga sign-up sheet, a symbol of our victory. This wasn't just about me. It was about power, how it thrives when no one fights back. Margaret thought she was untouchable, but one person's defiance, backed by a community, brought her down. Her settlement funded the Margaret Voss Legal Defense Fund, helping HOA victims nationwide. We've saved homes, ousted corrupt boards, and turned her name into a beacon of justice. Willow Creek is alive now, not her sterile vision of exclusivity, but a real community where people connect without fear. So what would you have done? Would you have signed Margaret's rule to avoid the fight, or risked everything to stand your ground? Should I have rebuilt the workshop or let her win by walking away? Was the community hub worth the battle, Or did I just replace one fight with another? Drop your thoughts below. Hit that like button if this hit home, and subscribe for more stories of neighbors, secrets, and karma coming full circle. Let's keep this conversation going. /Xi Artifact.